Hello, hello. Happy Wino Wednesday, all you fellow wine nerds. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's class of a blind tasting, where we are going to be trying 4 white wines. All of them are the same grape, but all 4 are quite different in terms of region and style. So not only are we going to learn how to determine what the grape is, but then we're going to break it down and figure out what the style is. If you're tuned into the chat room, I'd love to know who you are and where you're coming from. I obviously know who ordered the packs of these wines, but other people tune in that don't have necessarily the same wines as us. So no matter what, everyone's welcome. Anyone can tune in. Join this virtual tribe of wine geeks, and let's learn some tricks of the trade and in terms of blind tasting and how we're going to get this done. So, hey, Jen and Jared, it's been so long. I've seen you at different stuff. So, but I miss you tons, and hope you're both doing super well. By the way, Sandy and Rox said hello from the Belamonte wine dinner crew. I did a private event for them for Sandy's birthday party last weekend or the weekend right before that. So they wanted to let me know to tell you that they said hello. So anyone else logged in, tell me who you are. And while we're getting all of that information, let's just go over the setup here. So everyone should have your 4 wines, not so crudely labeled as my own are. You have the special tags on them. But 1, 2, 3, and 4. We are going to taste left to right, just like we read left to right. So just line up all of your wine glasses. We're going to try them all side by side. So just go ahead and line up all 4 wine glasses left to right, 1, 2, 3, and 4. If number 4 doesn't have that pinkish, copperish, peachish hue, then we've got the wrong tags on the wrong bottle. So just make sure that that is the one that has that color to it. The last one, the wine on the very far right. Then we have tasting sheets here for everybody. So you should have these tasting sheet grids that we're gonna go over pretty in-depthly for all of these wines, because every other class is not as analytical, but these classes for the blind tastings are definitely analytical. So we're gonna use this quite a bit. If you notice on the top, it'll say wine number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just make sure you have them, you know, all 4 sheets available to you. Next page here is the Wine Tasting 101. For those of you who have been tuning into my classes for a long time, you probably have this memorized. Anyone else, use it as much as you like. We will be going over every single step for each of the different wines. So in terms of, even if you are really familiar with it, it's helpful to kind of know where we are along the tasting portion. Next, we have this wine aroma chart. When you're trying to do blind tasting, sometimes we get stuck in our own tasting notes, and we often just say the same things over and over again. So using something like this as a vocabulary word bank, basically, is helpful to kind of get outside of your own head and figure out, I don't know, is there wet dog in this wine? And then going from there. Hopefully not. That means your wine is corked, and we don't want that. And finally, we're going to hide this away for the meantime. So this classic descriptors of white grape varieties. Now, I notice I did not include any red in there. So we have already narrowed down at least half of the grape varieties. Go ahead and just put that at the bottom of your stack. We're not going to touch that sheet until we get to the later portion of the class. So Chris Nelson, the Fab 5 are ready to rock. Awesome. Saw your setup. The glassware looks amazing. It's a lot of glassware, I know, for these classes. So thank y'all for sticking with me on a Wednesday in terms of lots of washing of wine glasses afterwards. So hey, Ryan, great to see you again. Sam Mom and Sam Pop are here. They're right across the table from me. So I'm always grateful to take over their kitchen table once a week and have dinner with them. It's awesome. Tawana joining in from Western Branch, great to see you. And Tony Simonetta with Jenny, great to see y'all as well. All right, so I know there's more people, but if you haven't figured out how to work the chat room, try and do that because it will be important in terms of me getting feedback from you of what you're smelling and tasting in the wine. That interaction is really key for blind tasting classes. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully you are ready to rumble, and these wines are going to be great. So couple things here. Just a note about blind tasting first before we get into this. Blind tasting is tricky, right? That's why professionals spend years and years and years developing these skills. It is a daily thing that people practice. I don't get to practice very much, so I might be good at coaching and teaching blind tasting, but I rarely get to blind taste myself. So I know how hard it is because the few times I do get to blind taste, it is very difficult. So don't be discouraged if you've got different thoughts than everybody else at your tasting group or online. Don't think that you don't have a good palate. Don't think that you failed if you don't guess the right grape or the right region. Purpose of blind tasting is really to learn how to analyze the wine, how to break components, and then put it back together as a whole before you have any preconceived notions about what the wine is. So whether it's red, white, rosé, bubbles, dessert wine, doesn't matter. Tasting a wine without knowing what it is helps us formulate more objective opinions about the wine. So that's the purpose. And then you know that you're getting good at it when you can combine the theory that you know about wine, which we're going to coach you through all of that, along with your own tasting skills, which is truly a skill. It's like learning a language. The more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. Putting together blind tasting really helps, where blind tasting is really just the combination of those two skills, but it is something you have to practice regularly. So we're going to have to be the fun kind of me, which is my favorite thing in the whole world. So all of that to say, we're going to have a blast, and we're going to practice some of the professional tasting techniques along the way. If you've all got your wine glasses here, what we're going to do is we're really going to focus on the ability to taste wines side by side. So that's going to help us learn our comparisons. Well, one is richer than another. Two is brighter than number 3. Number 4 is fuller bodied. All of those things are going to help us when it comes to finally guessing the grape and the region. So comparative tasting is what it's called when you compare them side by side. So as we go through each step, sight, smell, taste, and then conclusion, we're going to do all 4 wines, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for sight, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4 for smell, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the structure. If you've gone ahead and tasted all the wines already and you're sipping, that's totally fine, but I will be breaking the wines down in terms of those lines. So you don't necessarily have to wait. I know it's Wednesday night and you probably just got off work and traffic was crazy, or if you're working from home, the kids or the dogs. So totally fine if you're already sipping. Just make sure you leave enough wine to work through all of these different steps and processes. So, all right. Let's start with sight. One of the keys in determining grapes and often overlooked when people are tasting wine. People go straight to the smelling or straight to the tasting, and they forget about sight. So let's pick up glass number 1. So the very first wine very on the far left. And as you pick it up, you swirl it with a light source in the background. What you're looking for is clarity. So if there's any haziness or cloudiness, or if it's super brilliantly clear. Next, you're looking for color. Color is not actually found holding it up to the light like this because I'm picking up color from all around the room. It's best to find color actually if you hold a white piece of paper, napkin, plate, anything. Hold the wine right on its side, almost so it's about to spill out. I often spill wine doing this. And you're going to hold it about 2 inches above the white background and look straight down through it. That's where we're really going to see color. And if you notice, the wine is a lot paler when you when you look at the color like that versus when you're holding it up to the light. Mine, I had tasted a red wine slightly in this glass, so it's slightly different color. So I apologize about that, but you can't tell from the computer. The concentration really is more for red wines, but for white wines, it's really just how deeply pigmented is that wine. So is it really pale in terms of concentration or really heavy? Not the most important part, especially with white wines. And finally, legs or tearing, and that's after you swirl the wine. Kind of swirl aggressively, make sure the wine is coated throughout the inside of the glass. The extra wine is going to form these teardrops or legs or drips of wine that form the extra wine and fall down inside the glass. It's easier to see if you look at the part of the glass that's further away from you. You kind of have to hang it out for a second. And what we're looking for is how fast they form and fall and how defined they are. If they're falling down really quickly and they're not very defined, that's an indication of a lower alcohol content wine. If they're falling down super slow, they're super thick, sometimes there's a second round of legs, they're very defined, that's indicative of very high alcohol content wine. So let's go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, and 4 of sight all together. So if you have these tasting sheets, you can kind of spread them across. We're just gonna make elbow in some room there. Spread out your tasting sheets so that you can work on all 4 tasting sheets side by side. So I will guide us through this part, and we're gonna do this part a little bit faster than we have done in the past, so we can get to the more fun stuff in a bit. So and then it's helpful if you have 2 hands to hold 2 wines side by side and do it. So you can hold 1, 1, and 2 side by side. Clarity is pretty similar for both of these. I'm not seeing any real cloudiness or haziness, which means the wines are probably filtered. Color for both of these is definitely on that straw borderline yellow. So kind of right in the middle of pale straw and yellow for these. Concentration, and then finally the legs on wine 1 and 2. I'll always probably do like wine 1 and 2 together because we have holding them in both hands, and then wine 3 and 4 together. Let's see, waiting for those legs to hang out. I think I'm seeing, I think, a little bit thicker legs and a little bit more definition in wine number 1. Wine number 2 is also having a little bit of that sheeting effect. That's sheeting, where the wine is breaking apart in the glass, almost like Windex, rather than forming all these legs and falling down slowly. So I do see some breakup in wine number 2, which would also indicate lower alcohol content. Let's try wines number 3 and 4. Hey, Rick! From my stars to this afternoon. All right, so give wine. This is the very first part of the class that I'm already mixing up my numbers. This is not a good sign. You're gonna have to keep me on check. Wines 3 and 4 together. Go ahead and give them some good swirls. Let's check out the, whoa, wine number, I just polished these glasses, but wine number 3, the entire, can I see your glass? I'm gonna see if it's just my glass. The entire wine is just falling, oh yeah, it's this one too. It's falling fully down. That's the most intense sheeting I think I've seen. It is forming legs, but falling down very quickly, and the whole kind of rim is just coming down together in one big kind of sheeting effect. So indicative of low alcohol content wine. Wine number 4, however, I am getting pretty slow, pretty defined legs. Obviously the color on wine number 4 isn't even listed on here. It's peach, apricot-ish color, coppery, so quite a bit different. And I'm getting a little bit of tartrites, those crystallized, kind of looks like sugar crystals in the bottom of the glass. A little bit of white wine sediment is basically what that is. So quite different across the board, not only in terms of color, but also in terms of the legs, how they all operated, and the clarity there. So did anyone else get a drastically different reaction of their wines in their glass? So yeah, so can you tell, Ryan, what color? Hopefully the video camera is good enough. So we've got the same grape here, but one is like this. So obviously what they call an orange wine. and then the other is much paler. So, and I'm getting even between 3 and 4. If you want to take a look at the wines of 3 to 4, the coloring is definitely more intensely yellow on wine number 3. So like they're both about the same concentration, but I'm getting more of the like straw, goldeny hues versus a very intense yellow. It almost looks like, you know, you put some like banana flavoring in there, that intensely yellow color of the wine. So if anyone else got a drastically different reaction in the wine, let me know. So does 3 even have a little green in it? Yeah. So what we call in the wine tasting world, man, Sam Pop is stepping up his game here. His tasting notes are getting on point. So we call them primary colors and secondary colors. So if you're doing a professional tasting, you would say deeply yellow with flecks or secondary colors of green and almost a little blue in there as well, which, you know, blue and yellow make green, versus the wine number 2 is pale straw with secondary colors of peach, maybe. And wine number 3 is definitely peachy coppery with secondary colors of, there's like some pink pops in there. It's not just brownish tinges. So wine number 4 also is dropping in sheets, almost no legs. I got the opposite reaction in mine. I got pretty thick legs. Again, whenever you're first doing this with wine, sometimes it's about saturating the inside of the glass, especially if it's the first time you've used it, or since it was washed and polished. So give it some other good swirls, because we should see some pretty defined legs in wine number 4. But wine number 3, yeah, I keep trying to saturate my glass and it's still just coming down in full sheets. So, all right. Anyone want to know the answers? Yeah, if you pop it, go ahead and put your Venmo handle in there, and they can bribe you for the answers. So, all right. So let's jump into the smell. Again, if you've already jumped ahead, that's totally fine. We are going to take it step by step here together. So go ahead and pick up wine number 1 and 2. The big reason why we swirl the wines before we smell them is to make sure that we are releasing those aromatics or esters in the wine. So swirling the wine allows the wine to coat the inside of the glass. Alcohol is going to evaporate just slightly, and that evaporation releases those aromatic molecules and compounds into the air. The eggs, hopefully there's no eggs in your wine. And then get your noses in there. And what I'll have you do is just kind of get the first impression of the nose on all 4 wines. So I just did wine 1 and 2. And I'll hop straight into 3 and 4 before you think too much about it. Whew. Oh my word. Number 4 is just a kick in the pants. So differently. Everyone, if you've done that, all 4 wines, you kind of get your first impressions. It's kind of it's really important to me in terms of doing comparative tastings, because then we see how our impressions kind of shift and change as we get more into the wine. So this is where you can break out that wine aroma grid if you want. Break it out, and let's get a little bit more in depth to each of these wines as we taste along. Great, thank you, Chris. That is perfect. Color 4 is rose gold. I was trying to come up with it. I was like, I know there's a specific thing that this is, but I couldn't nail it. Thank you. That is the most perfect thing. It's like iPhone rose gold is exactly what's going on. So let's get more into those aromatics. And so we're in this part of the tasting grid right here. We're going to first talk about intensity. So when we say intensity, we mean, is it rushing up out of the glass? Is it highly aromatic? Is it energetically talking to you? Or is it shy, reserved, and kind of closed up and not really saying a lot to you? So, and usually just say like, yes, intense, moderately intense, or light and soft. Go ahead and just concentrate on the intensity for all 4 wines. and tell me which one has the most intense nose and maybe which one has the least intense nose. And whenever you're talking about a wine in the chat room, just to help everybody out, you can say wine 1, colon, and then list your answer, or wine 4, colon, list your answer. So, oh my word, wow. That is incredible. So Rick Morrison says that we visited the Gobelin, I guess is how that's pronounced, factory in Paris last year. The artisans worked in the factory could distinguish 2,500 variations in colors. Most of us mortals cannot match. Yes, 100%. I can see better than I can hear, but I'm definitely not great at that for sure. Yeah, all right, so 4, most intense on the nose, 1 and 2 the least. I would agree. Yeah, I'd say almost 2 for me would be the least intense. Then 1 step up, we have number 1, maybe 1 step up from that, 3, and then finally 4 is definitely pretty intense on the nose. Now I'll just chat about fruit. So this is where we start. We're going to slow it down, kind of sped up that first part. I want to concentrate on fruit condition, and on non-fruit things that we're smelling, because those tasting notes or smelling notes are going to be integral in terms of figuring out what grape it is that is in our glass and where they come from. Let's see, going back here. So Tony says wine number 3 was least intense. Jenny says number 1 is most. I say 4. Okay. Tony and Jenny, you're probably like Sam Mom and Sam Pop. They often have kind of opposite tasting notes, and half the crowd will go with Sam Mom, half the crowd goes with Sam Pop. So yes, welcome to Marriage Counseling 101 with Kira. All right, regardless, I think they're all different in noses, and this isn't where we're gonna be splitting hairs in terms of what's the most important thing to be on track with. The most important things are definitely the fruit and fruit condition. What do I mean by fruit condition? So say I smell lemon. Lemon is found in, like, aromatic compounds of lemon are found in like every white wine, so it's always a correct guess. But the condition of the lemon, is it like fresh and not even cut up? Like I just picked up a lemon and smelled it in the grocery store, or am I just cutting it? Maybe it's like underripe and so it's not super juicy. Maybe it's a lemon that was sitting on my counter for way too long and I totally forgot about it. But now I need a gin and tonic, and so I slice open that lemon and it's almost got that kind of funky note to it because it's got a little bit too much oxygen in it. Or maybe it's cooked. Maybe it's a lemon cream pie. Maybe it's lemon curd. Maybe it's lemon meringue. All of those are conditions of the fruit. So yes, the fruit is important, but the fruit condition is often more important in terms of blind tasting notes than anything. And non-fruit, you can go anywhere from floral notes, herbaceous notes, still things that are growing and organic, just not fruit. Or you can go inorganic. You can go mineral components that you're smelling. Maybe you're smelling leather. Maybe you're getting spice notes. Maybe you're getting some funk notes, like biological notes. Maybe you're getting some mushroomy forest floor wet leaf notes or leather. All of those things are kind of the non-fruit. You can also have like non-fruit conditions, so if you're getting mushrooms or they're fresh or uncooked. But it's the focus on the fruit condition, and the non-fruit things. And any other notes you want to pour on there. So get your noses in there. Go ahead and just anything that jumps out at you on either of these wines, any of these wines, all 4, go ahead and type it in the chat room. And I look forward to hearing your smelling notes because these wines are quite interesting. Let's see here. Chris Nelson says 1 and 3 light intensity, 2 moderate, and 4 is the most. All right, so we have some, I think most agree that 4 is more intense. Jenny, sorry. And a lot of people are varying on terms of 1, 2, and 3 because they're pretty similar levels of intensity. I think also number 4 is just most distinct in its nose. It's the most different out of all 4 of them, so it comes across as being the most intense. But again, not the type. Mom is often wrong. You should see my mom's face right now. She might need some more wine, or she might be just drinking out of my dad's glass now. Wine number 4 was intense, but the nose seems perhaps a bit herbal rather than fruity. Okay, so again, so you can have, not all wines are fruit forward, right? Some wines are a lot more earth driven or herbal driven or mineral driven. So all of those are important to note for sure. Let's see. Great. Ryan says a lemon preserved with salt can get those salty citrus notes sometimes too. So that briny component that often comes in wine. So it'd be one of the things that you could mention on the non-fruit category. So Tawana says wine number 1, candied tangerine with cooked canned green beans. All right. All right. Yes. Papa says that's why he controls the computer, Mom. Chris says, number 1, more tropical fruit. Number 2, honeysuckle. Number 1, Renzi says an underripe guava. All right, cool. Tawana says wine number 2, banana Laffy Taffy with maybe some mint. So you're picking up on the fruit and the herbaceous compounds on both of these wines. Fabulous. We had green beans for dinner, so that might be affecting your nose. And yes, especially if it's kind of still in the air if you cooked them. Mom, what are you smelling on wine number 4?
Tobacco.
Tobacco, like you just
potpourri floral.
All right, so some mom says wine number 4 has like tobacco notes with potpourri and floral. So the floral component, the potpourri component floral, that would be the condition of the flowers. I like that call. It's got this interesting pungent blend of masculine and feminine. I think she nailed it perfectly. If that tobacco, that masculine note with the feminine note, but both are pretty pungent, right? Some mom is not often wrong. All right, let's talk about number 3. What's driving the bus on wine number 3? And when I say that, I always refer to the flavor bus. So on this aromatic compound bus, you have a lot of things going on. You get obviously lemon and all of these things. You could have any other component aspect of the wine. It's all in the bus together. But what's driving the bus is the flavor that's kind of most specific, most intense, that's kind of leading the charge, controlling the aromatic of the wine. Anything specific to you that's driving the bus on wine number 3? Number 4, Chris says funk. The newbie says mushrooms. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Yeah, the tobacco, mushrooms, there is some funk going on for sure. Struggling with wine number 3, yes. So wine number 3 is a little bit more difficult, I think, on the nose here. Number 3, some pineapple. I'd agree with that. I like pineapple out of the can, like it's almost this like steely, tinny kind of pineapple on here. Because to me, what's driving the bus on wine number 3 is the mineral component. Like it smells like kind of wet sidewalk, wet rocks, wet gravel. And all of the fruit is there. It's just kind of a little bit more reserved, I think, and shyer. All right, let's talk about wine number 2. So you'll notice if this is your first time blind tasting with me, I'm going to go through 1 through 4 in order, and then I'll hop back over to 2, and then I'll hop over to 4, and then I'll go 3 and 4 together, 1 and 2 together. Changing up the progression in your compared tastings is really key in terms of making sure your nose doesn't start to get kind of saturated in the order. So mixing it up is helpful to continue to smell new things as you go through the wines. So Rick says, am I smelling anise on wine number 3? I get like that green licorice-y kind of component, almost like raw fennel maybe, or basil, fresh basil. So those vegetal components that have those like licoricey notes, but on a like fresher, more herbal side. The aromatic wines, paler wines, softer wines, will give you some trouble. So you can cup your hand on top of the glass, you can swirl it around. That's going to release all those esters in the glass, but they're going to be trapped in the glass then. So then you can kind of get a little more concentration, and ooh, man, I get just straight up dirt. Just
nutty.
A little bit nutty, someone says. So like maybe the skins of like almonds, you know, just that really kind of dusty, dirty, not a, to me, I don't get like sweet nutty. Do you get sweet nutty, Mom?
No.
Okay, not sweet nutty. So, and like grass, I get like fresh cut grass almost. And grass is what it is. I'm getting that mix of herbal and so. Let's talk about wine number 2. Now that these wines are warming up a little bit, they should be a little bit easier, especially if you just pull them out of the fridge right at 7 o'clock. Between 1 and 2, I think they have maybe the most similar nose profiles. I'm getting possibly, what would you say that the primary difference is between wine number 1 and wine number 2 on the nose? I don't want to leave the witness. You can also, if you're doing this and it's not really working, you're still not picking up anything, sometimes switching to a different nostril is helpful. Sometimes sticking your whole nose in there is helpful, but sometimes you just get more alcohol evaporation that way, so you get kind of less. So sometimes doing just a long, slow inhale from the nose can help you get from like past one thing that you're smelling into the next 2 or 3 things that are there. So, all right. So 1, more floral, Sun Pop says. 2, more citrus. All right. Tawana, number 2, sweeter on the nose, where 1 has more herbs. All right. You know, Tawana, I'm getting green beans now on wine number 1. I don't know if it's just power of suggestion, but I do get green beans out of a can on wine number 1. I would definitely agree with Steve in that I get a lot more citrusy, brighter notes on wine number 2. Yeah, and almost those herbs are like cooked on wine number 1.
Burnt sugar on wine.
Some mom says a little bit burnt sugar, that oxidative quality that would lead us to believe that there might be oak aging on it, or maybe it was just not made in a reductive style, meaning stainless steel with no oxygen interaction whatsoever. No, you're definitely not crazy. Sometimes it just takes me longer to catch up with what everyone is getting. Now I can't get it out of my glass. Chris says, group consensus, number 2, sweeter. Agree with Tawana on the nose. All right, cool. Let's get into the taste palette now. Actually, before we do that, let's go back to wine number 4 as it's warmed up and see if there's anything we want to add before we jump into tasting. Rick says 1 is more closed, 2 is more fruity, citrus and honeysuckle. All right, awesome. Chris says split decision on what the fruit or floral category. I think all of the wines, because it's the same grape, you're going to get fruit and floral notes because it's the same grape, and the fruit and floral notes are going to be throughout each of the wines. So it's a good thing if you are getting flowers and similar fruits along all the wines because same grape, baby. Ooh. Getting like this pickled note on wine number 4 now. It's like kind of like green olives or something like that. All right. Tawana says, I really thought number 4 was a mistake when I saw the color. The nose isn't helping. How is it the same grape? So most white wine doesn't have skin contact at all. So certain white grapes they make into what they call orange wine. And so I threw this out there just to kind of almost be a little cheeky. And so whenever you see a white wine that has this color, usually means it was aged for a long time on the skins. We'll talk about that more once we get into it, but I promise you it's not a mistake. It is the same grape. It just has a ton of skin contact on it, which is why it smells so different too. Number 4, a little menthol or eucalyptus. Cool. Number 4, rotten apricot. Yeah, so all the fruit things, but a little bit on the funky side of everything. Number 4, Tony says, smells a little bit similar to the Thomas Jefferson champagne. It's a sparkling rosé that he loves from the Limoux region of France. It's on my current feature list. So, by the way, if you're interested, I just rolled out my new website, vinocultureva.com, and it's got all my new wine features on it, and you can click on them and see the order. Side note and shameless self-promotion and plug rollout. But all right, let's get into tasting now. And we are going to go through each of the steps, each of the tasting steps on that basics of tasting sheet here, and go through each wine. But just like we did in smell, if you haven't already, go ahead and sip. Just take a small sip. Don't swish and swirl. Don't think too much. Get that first impressions of the taste, just like we did for the smell and sight. I love it when wines are surprising. They smell and taste. There's a difference in how they taste. It's surprising. All right. So 1, go on to 2. Okay. Also quite interesting. Great question. Rick says, can you detect alcohol in the nose? Absolutely, because especially as you're swirling it, that alcohol is going to be evaporating into your sinuses. So the more you kind of feel that, oh, I feel that all the way up into my sinuses, generally speaking, the higher the alcohol content. So a really great winemaker can integrate their wines, integrate alcohol into their wines. So even if it's higher alcohol content, it might not be so intense on the nose. Less fabulously made wines, even if they're lower, can sometimes be what we call hot on the nose. You feel that alcohol burn on the nose, even if the actual percentage of alcohol is a little bit lower. So, these wines are so cool. Tawana, wow. I don't know what you're saying wow to, but hopefully it's just the first impression of all 4 wines. And finally, number 4. Again, could not be more different. Thought I detected that on number 4. Yes, alcohol, and I was getting, out of all of the legs, the most intense legs on wine number 4 as well. So that would indicate higher alcohol content. So let's just go through it and we shall see. Let's talk about acid first. And let me break down why we break down the components of wine like this. So just like to learn how the analogy I used, wine switch, is just going to stick with me, even though I know nothing about cars or engines, is an engine of a car. Really, for the mechanic to figure out what's going on, sometimes you kind of got to break down the engine of a car, break it apart, take all the parts, clean everything, and then put it back together. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to focus on individual structural components. So not flavor components. That's what you taste. That's the lemon, the honeysuckle, the apple and apricot thing. Structure is all about the chemical organization of the wine. So acidity level, tannin level, alcohol, body, sweetness, all of those things is structure. Then we're going to put structure and flavor together to really figure out what the wine is. So acid's the first and probably one of the most important structural components of the wine. And we're going to feel that right in the back of our throat, the back of our cheeks here. And it's going to give us a puckering sensation and a mouth-watering sensation. So take a big sip now, not the small first impressions head nod sip. Take a bigger sip, swish it around your mouth like mouthwash. And after you either spit it out or swallow, lean back, touch the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth, right behind your front teeth, and breathe in. So tip of the tongue, roof of the mouth, right behind the front teeth, and breathe in. After you swallow, don't try and do it with wine in your mouth. And then notice the acidic effects on your palate. So you should feel that puckering. And you can lean forward and feel the mouth watering effect. So you'll feel your mouth watering, called the drool effect, the slobber effect. The more it gives you excessive slobber, the higher levels of acidity in the wine. So let's try for wine number 1. All right, now before we talk about what wine number 1 is, we kind of need to see the comparisons, because we just know that there's acid in this wine, right? We don't know if it's high or low, or right there in the middle. So rehydrate your mouth, water or whatever is that close by. And when you kind of have like a neutral palate, go ahead and go to wine number 2. And notice the comparison. Is your mouth watering and puckering more or less than wine number 1? Okay, what do y'all think? Wine number 2, higher or lower levels of acidity compared to wine number 1? So wine number 1 is kind of our control. What do you think, Pop?
About the same.
Okay, they could be the same, right? That's totally fine too. Anyone get a big difference between them?
Put it 2.
Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. 5 would be like straight lemon water. 1 would be like, I don't get any, like hardly any pucker effect at all. Most wines are going to be between 2, 3, and 4. You have those extremes sometimes. So Tawana says pretty close. I think 1, maybe by only a hair. Chris says 2 is higher. So again, we are going to be splitting hairs here. And I'm going to go back to 1 because I'm leaning with the gang with the Chris gang that 2 is slightly higher. And then, but Lisa says higher on 1. So let's see. So going back to 1, actually, after 2, it feels like it's lower even than 2 was. Sometimes the first wine you try, like, it just accentuates that that activation of your salivary glands so intensely because it's the first time you've done it, but it seems more intense. I'm going to go back and try number 2 again, but I'm leaning even more towards 2 being a little bit higher acid level. So again, we're going to switch up the progression. We try 1 and 2, and then we try 2 to 1, and back to 2 again, maybe back to 1. That's why I can just keep pouring more wine. So I get a lower effect on both of them because now I've kind of, my salivary glands are ready to go. Yeah, I'd say they're pretty darn similar. I'd say both are about like a 3.5, 3 to 3.5. I think maybe the second one slightly higher, but 1 could also be higher. I feel like either one could be correct in which one is higher. So let's resaturate. Let's go to 3 and 4, and then see which one overall 4 has higher levels of acidity. All right. Seeing my parents' faces while tasting this wine, it's higher levels of acid right on number 3. Definitely getting a more intense pepper effect, honestly, even just while tasting the wine, not even doing the full acid test there. So far, out of the first 3, going higher on 3, kind of almost right about the same for wines 1 and 2.
Oak on number 3. The tannin, oak, barrelly.
Skipping ahead on the tasting notes. Some I'm jumping straight ahead. But yes. All right. So overall, what do you think? Now that you've tried all 4 wines, was there one that was noticeably higher or lower than the other? All right about the same? What is your palate telling you? Whew. Number 4 was the highest for Sampap, okay? Number 3 says the highest was for Tijuana. All right. This is where the blind tastings, where we do the 4 grapes side by side, really get interesting because, again, we're splitting hairs. It's all the same grape, right? There's slightly different styles, different regions, but it's all the same grape, and so there shouldn't be necessarily crazy differences. You'll find minute differences, but these aren't the things that are gonna tell you your palate's off or anything like that. So some mom says number 3 was the highest for her. So she agrees with you, Tawana. Y'all always are like tracking right along. I would tend to agree. I think I got so much alcohol on the 4th one, wine number 4, that it almost made the back of my mouth active. But I think I was reacting more to the alcohol necessarily than the acid. So Chris says, ranking in order from high to low acidity. So number 2, high, then number 4, then number 3, then number 1. Okay, kind of got ranges of notes across the board. All of these, though, I would say are between 3 and 4, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, they're all between 3 and 4. So we're really splitting hairs here, and go with your gut here. Your tasting notes are going to help you figure out, because everyone's got different levels of sensitivity too, and there are different acid compounds. So you might react more to citric acid versus total levels of acidity versus just pH balance of overall. So it's okay that you disagree with your tasting partners. Lisa Nest also agrees with 3. So 3 of the tasting gals there saying 3, but I wouldn't, if I were marking your notes, I wouldn't say that that is a make or break it for sure. So sweetness is very tricky on wine. So that's the first structural component taste test that we're going to do. Next is sweetness. Sweetness can be tricky because what we're looking for is actual residual sugar in the wine. So as you ferment the wine, yeast eats the sugar. The byproduct is alcohol and carbon dioxide. If the yeast finishes eating all of the natural sugar of the grapes, or added sugar if you're doing formulaic wine, if they're eating all of the sugar, you're going to be left with a wine that has no residual sugar. So they're not adding sugar afterwards. Sugar is only added in the fermentation process at the very beginning to kickstart fermentation. That's it. So residual sugar at the end will just because fermentation stopped before the yeast ate all of the sugar. So it'll be leftover sugar. Now, sometimes wines can be really fruity. Sometimes they can be very aromatic. The fruit can be, the condition of the fruit can be really sweet and ripe. Sometimes you get floral notes. All of these things might lead our brain to think that the wine's sweet when there's no residual sugar. Other times, the wine can be so acidic and so tart and so citrus notes that the acid kind of takes over the actual residual sugar that's in the wine. So it doesn't taste sweet, but it does have some sweetness to it. So to really figure that out, we concentrate the wine on the part of our tongue that experiences sugar in the highest levels of sensitivity, which is just the tip of your tongue. So if you stick just the tip of your tongue into the wine, don't bring the wine into your mouth, just the tip of the tongue into the wine. That's where you're really gonna feel, is there any sugar left over in the wine? So do that for all 4 wines, and in between, make sure you're just rinsing your mouth out with water. And tell me if you think any of these wines do have a touch or a lot or no residual sugar. And whenever you're ready, you can type that into the chat room. By the way, I appreciate all your comments, y'all. Thank you so much. It really helps me gauge what's going on because I can't read the room. I can't see everyone's facial expressions like I can in the real life classes. So. Okay, I've just done 1 and 2. I'm about to do 3 and 4 sweetness tests. Ooh. Man, these are so different. And I think we're doing a little experiment here at with Sam Mom and Sam Pop to figure out what sweetness feels like on the tip of your tongue. So you can even do this. Take wine number, any of these wines, pour a little bit of the same wine into a different glass, dissolve like a tiny bit of sugar into it, stir it around, and then you can taste like the control version and then sweetness added version to really figure out where your tongue, how you're going to feel sweetness on your tongue. So if anyone's getting sweetness on any of these wines in any level, go ahead and type that into the chat room so we can tell. See, Tawana says 1 and 2 had very little. If 3 seemed very dry, 4 had a touch of sweetness. Okay, I definitely agree. Like number 3 is bone dry. That's what we call it. Like literally no sugar at all. It feels like something was taken out of your tongue when you do a test on wine number 3. Are you getting a different reaction?
You said 2 first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
3.
Wine number 3, bone dry. So negative sweetness level on wine number 3. It feels almost chalky. Excuse me. I promise it's not the Rona. Wine number 1 is the only one that we sent sweetness on. Chris Nelson says, anyone else have varying opinions? What do you think, Sam?
Splitting hairs again.
Splitting hairs. That's right. That's what blind tasting is all about. Some Pop.
That's it.
No sweetness.
No sweetness on.
No sweetness on any of them. Some Pop says. Some says be difficult to tell because we're splitting hairs so much. I would agree with the Chris Nelson crew. I think wine number 1 has an ever so slightly touch of sweetness. By all means, would still be considered a dry wine, but it does have that touch of sweetness. I'd say 2 is dry. 3 is bone dry. And number 4 might have a slight touch as well, from dry to just a slight touch. So again, all splitting hairs pop up to the bone dry level of wine number 3, and then all of the others are real similar. So kind of that tastiness, learning how to split hairs even more. Now, for alcohol is going to help us figure out region almost more than anything. So it is still an important thing to note. You do have to swallow the wine for this test, and what we're focusing on, not the mouth-watering effect, not anything on our tongue, not anything in our gums, just how we feel the wine go down our esophagus and where you feel that burn stop, that alcohol as it stops evaporating. So you drink scotch straight up, then that is going to burn all the way down to the insides of your stomach, warms you up all inside. So the lower you feel it burn, the higher the alcohol content. So take a sip of each of these wines. If you need to start refilling your glasses, do so, because we still have quite a few notes to go through. And like we talked about before when Rick asked the previous question, You can have wines that actually have higher alcohol content level that you don't feel as much because it's really well-made integrated wine. And sometimes you have wines that feel like they're really hot and high in levels of alcohol, and they actually aren't. And that's just not necessarily the best made wine. And just like all of the other tests, when you've done the test, if you notice anything big, like one or another has much higher or lower alcohol levels, just tell the group in the chat room. If y'all need to refill. Ooh. Number one has a little bit more heat than I was expecting. Also, these wines have been sitting in our glass for a while. They're closer to room temperature than when they're right out of the refrigerator, which will increase that alcoholic evaporation effect, which will increase your sensitivity to it. So these aren't necessarily the temperatures that you might prefer drinking your white wines at, but they are great in helping kind of increase the flavor profiles and distinctions of the wines. All right, try one, number two. Get quite a noticeable difference in the alcohol level between 1 and 2. This is my favorite part of the tasting because you get to drink it all. You have to drink it all. Even if you're doing a professional tasting, get this test, you got to drink it. Some mom and some pop at least agree that number 4 has the most alcohol. About to try now. Whew. Wow. Wow. It's got a little kick to it. That just keeps going. Yes, that wine has definitely probably got the highest level of alcohol content. So if number 4 had the longest burn, Tawana says, great. So number 2 would be the lowest. I would absolutely agree with you. I think number 2 definitely had the least amount of noticeable alcohol. Number 4, long burn. Is that exactly what you said? Anyone else get anything different or a different perception of alcohol throughout these 4 wines? See, Rick says 4 is the highest. Great. 1 and 3 are similar, and 2 would be the lowest. Awesome. I think we're right on par there. Samam says she feels. Well, my face is now the color of this wine. I'm not saying that out loud. Y'all can all read the comments. Oh, this is like in high school. She taught chemistry labs in my high school, and she introduces herself. It's like a brand new school for me too, and she introduces herself in the first chemistry lab, and I was not the cool kid either. I was struggling to fit in as it was. And she said, yes, your dad, I'm Kira's mom. She points me out. And she was like, I met Kira's dad when he was tutoring me in chemistry. And boy, did I get an A in that class. And yes, I think that was like one of the most mortifying things that has ever happened to me as an adolescent. But, you know, doing it on live camera is even better now. But I'm less embarrassed now. It's great. All right. So let's get into, so we talked about alcohol level. Yes, I gotta like rework my brain here. So number 4, high. Number 2 would be the lowest. 1 and 3 are similar. I'd say between 1 and 3, 1 would be higher for me. So I'd kind of go like number 4 is the highest, then number 1, then number 3, then number 2. That's how I would rate it. But again, splitting hairs. So Tony says, based on the leg test, number 3 should be noticeably lower, but it doesn't present itself that way while tasting. Why the disparity? Great question. I think part of it is any residual sugar in the wine will increase the viscosity in the glass, making those legs seem more intense. Because this wine was so bone dry, like 0 out of 0 grams of residual sugar, that increased the sheeting effect, and it increased the perception of a lower alcohol content on the legs versus the palate itself. So if there is any residual sugar in your wine, it will increase the viscosity of the wine and increase the definition and thickness and slowness to fall of the legs. So while all of these are similar and one had pretty bold legs, it's also, we were tasting a little bit of sweetness. So each of these tests are just like little clues along the way. It's about pulling them all together because sometimes there is a little bit of a disparity. And so that's why it's important to do all of the tests and not just gauge alcohol on smell or appearance of the legs by itself. So you got to do kind of all the steps and kind of come up with the overall conclusion, if that helps as an answer. Hopefully that clarified or just made it more complicated. All right, so body is the next test, and that's just how heavy the wine sits on your tongue. Kind of, so after you swallow the wine, how heavy does it sit? If you drink skim milk, that would be very light-bodied finish, or not finish, sorry, light-bodied textural. If you drink whole milk, that's a fuller bodied texture in your mouth. So between all 4 of these, does any of them have a noticeably difference in body? Is one noticeably lighter or fuller than another? Now remember, body has nothing to do with alcohol percentage, has nothing to do with sweetness, has nothing to do with finish, like how long the flavor lasts, it has nothing to do with acidity. It's how the weight of the overall wine. So make sure as we're doing each individual test, we're not getting distracted by like, oh, well, the alcohol burn lasts so long that I feel like it's a fuller bodied wine. Different things. So make your brain tune out all the other information and focus on one specific structural component of the wine at a time as you feel it in your mouth. One seems to have the lowest body. 3 and 4 about the same with the most. Okay, let's see. All right, so to your point, Chris, just make sure we are going to talk about alcohol. I mean, we already did, and we are going to talk about finish, but body is a very separate thing. So focus first on the body, and then we'll get to finish right after this. And that's how long the flavor lasts in your mouth. So you can have a very light-bodied wine, and you continue to taste it in your mouth after you've swallowed for quite a long time. So you can have a light-bodied wine with a long finish. You can have a full-bodied wine that, like, immediately after you swallow it, the finish kind of just falls apart. So body and finish are very different things. Often they get put together, and that doesn't help us become better tasters. We have to separate the two. And it's one of the hardest things, I think, to separate until you really practice. So across the board, would you say all 4 of these wines are fuller-bodied or lighter-bodied or right in the middle? Because they're all going to be similar, right? All the same grape. So would you say across the board, are they fuller, lighter, or medium? All 4 of them together. It's Wednesday. Tawana says 1 to 3 had super similar body that would put it in medium. Number 4 was just a tad heavier on the tongue and seemed to coat the mouth more. Great, that's body, awesome. Chris Nelson, okay, just told the group to focus. This is the part where it starts to, everyone starts to, your palate becomes a little desensitized as we become more inebriated. So that's why we do the more complicated things first. until we get to the discussion of what grape it is and where it comes from. And then we're going to have to really focus. So I hear you on that one. It is hard. Rick says, highest to lowest. 1 would be highest in terms of body, then 4, then 3, then 2. I couldn't agree with you more, Rick. I think that's exactly how I would rate them. I think 1 does, for me, coat my tongue and kind of like sit heavy on my tongue the most. And 4 right below that. Again, we're separating intensity of flavor away from this too. It's just how the weight of the wine. And I would say 2 is definitely for me the lowest. Felt like less than skim milk, felt like drinking water kind of thing. Medium to medium bodied. And then we're going towards the medium to medium plus with the other 3 in different variances. So again, splitting hairs, but that's the fun of this. Now finish, that's what everyone's jumping to because that's what naturally we are told in every wine tasting notes. Oh, it's got a full finish. It's got a light finish, a clean finish, a long finish. All tasting notes talk about finish more than anything else in terms of the end of their tasting notes. So now we can go there, and that's just how long does the flavor linger in your mouth. Now, sometimes the flavor lingers in your mouth in just a bad way. That's called an aftertaste. With wine, hopefully it's a good taste that lingers in your mouth, and so we call it a finish. If you ever talk about aftertaste with a wine, that immediately is a connotation that, but basically it's aftertaste, right? It continues after you swallow the wine. So if any of them had a really long finish, let me know. And if any of them just kind of died off right immediately, that doesn't mean it was a bad wine. It's just the nature of the grape. Sometimes it does mean it's a bad wine. So not necessarily indicative of quality. So to me, number 1 was one of the fuller bodied wines of the group, but the finish doesn't last very long at all, very short finish, but it sat heavy on my tongue. Let's try number 2. Number 2, even shorter of a finish. The flavor's gone almost immediately. So light bodied and a short finish. Let's try number 3. So I'd say number 3, slightly fuller bodied than number 2, but less than 1. But the finish lasted longer than either of those, especially that mineral component. Almost feels like I still have like this chalky gravel grit on my tongue. So a longer finish, I'd say medium finish on wine number 3. Finally, let's try wine number 4. Wine number 4 would definitely have the longest finish. And again, that body was kind of right up there with wine number 1, maybe right below it. Similar, but to me, it had the longest finish out of all 4 of these. So remember that in the future when you're tasting wine to separate out body and finish because they don't necessarily go hand in hand. So now we've taken apart all of the components from the site to all the different aromatic components and flavor components to the structural components of the wine. So now that's where we get into like we put it all back together again, make it one wine, and let's think about our overall perception of the wine. Balance is the true balance of all the different flavors. So this is the balance beam and all the flavors are on it, all the flavors of the flavor bus, and that bus is balanced on a balance beam. And is it tilted? Is one thing like way more than another? Like this is just so sweet, I can't taste anything else. Or this is so bitter, I can't taste anything else. Or are all of those flavors balanced together? We can also call balance, another word for balance is integration. So all those flavors, do they come together to kind of create one cohesive wine, or the flavors kind of disjointed and the structure is disjointed and everything's kind of all over the place. I call it starbursty wine. Not that it tastes like Starburst, but there's just these bursts of flavor in weird areas and the structure is all over the place. I just get really heavy alcohol and then all the acid. So that would be an unbalanced wine. A balanced or integrated wine is how all the flavors come together, create one unit, and it's not tilted one way crazy or another. Complexity is different. So again, those things often get put together, but complexity is how much is going on. So you can have a really complex wine that is balanced. That's kind of like the best of all worlds, right? So much flavor going on, but it's really well put together and integrated. You can also have a very simple wine, meaning the opposite of complex, that's balanced. The simple flavors that are there are still integrated. And you can have the reverse. You can have simple wines that are not balanced, and you can have complex wines that are not balanced. So you can have any combination of those categories. So you talked to me about balance and complexity. Did any one of these wines strike you as being very balanced or very off balanced or very complex or very simple? Or are they all perfectly in the middle, somewhere in between? Yes, let me, hold on. Question about the color of wine number 1 and wine number 4. Here's wine number 1, wine number 4, and I'll hold up this in the background there. So wine number 1 is definitely that pale yellow straw, hints more towards yellow, but definitely on that paler straw side. And wine number 4, that rose gold, like Chris so adeptly pointed out. So after we talk about balance and complexity, we're going to get into our overall conclusion and then get into the fun part, guessing of the grape and the figuring out of the region. So any notes you have about balance or complexity, go ahead and throw that up in the chat room. Tawana says, number 4, semi-balanced, but very complex. Great, I love it. Not necessarily the most balanced one. Number 1 through 3 were all balanced. 2 seemed more complex than wine 1 and 3. All right, Steve Hill says 4 is more complex, less balanced also, still his favorite. Love it. My dad loves the funky wines, which I love him for that because I love funky wines too. Yes, it is true. The finish was quite similar between 1 and 4, even though the difference in color and style was obviously so drastically different. Let's see. This is where it does help to retaste the wine. Because when you're tasting the wine and breaking apart all the individual structural components, at the end, to figure out your overall conclusion, you have to taste it again and think about it as a whole, as one unit, and focus on how all of those things come together to create this wine. Is it a balanced wine? Is it complex? And it is really necessary to have that kind of like one more bigger sip to focus on that. Rick says, none are overly unbalanced, but I don't detect any real complexity. Okay. So you would say they're all on the more simple side of things, but still along a similar vein of balance. All right. Any other last notes? And then we'll go into overall conclusion and break down the grape. Love it. Rick is a a lover of very complex wines. So it's really hard to compare the levels of complexity of these wines to the complexity of what I know he loves to collect and drink. So, Rick, by the way, you and Tony have very similar tastes in wines, except for Burgundy, but really similar taste in Italian and French wines. And one of these days, y'all need to have Portsmouth and Williamsburg meet and talk wine for sure. It's my goal always is to have these classes and tasting events, bring people together. Obviously, it's harder when it's virtual. So I think I would agree with everyone. I think overall level of complexity is just about a medium. I think overall level of, I think number 2 might be for me, the least complex wine, the most simple. I think there's a little bit more going on in 3, and 1 is out there, but it's out there, right? There's definitely some interesting notes on this, and we'll explain why that all is once we figure out what grape it is. So this is when we are going to break down this sheet right here. This is not when we open up that envelope, so don't open that envelope up yet. First, we have to decide what grape it is. Then the envelope will be the clues into what regions we are going to guess. So let's see what we can just rule out, because that's what blind tasting in the professional world is. We call it the deductive tasting method. So we've just been working through, unbeknownst to you, the deductive tasting method, where we just deduce all this information. So then by process of elimination, we can more easily guess what grape it is we're tasting. So let's start at the bottom, because I usually start at the top. So just for kicks, start with me at the bottom. So Gewürztraminer is how this is spelled. Floral, honeysuckle, honey, beeswax, orange, spice, lychee, peach, very aromatic, pale to golden in color, medium to medium plus body, dried off dry, medium levels of acidity and alcohol. So I put a pin in that because we did have those, we did have floral notes. I heard y'all say some honey notes. There were some citrus notes, some peach. Some of these were more aromatic than others. So I put a pencil in a pin on that, like possible. Not a strong candidate necessarily, but possible. We'll see if there's any stronger ones as we go. Vienna. With orange, floral notes, that's what I mean. Tangerine and apple, lemon, weighty, very aromatic, can feel oily. I would say, and the color is very yellow. Medium to full bodied, dry to off dry, low to medium acid, and medium alcohol. I would say that doesn't really fit kind of any of our tasting notes necessarily. Especially the oily feeling, the very, very aromatic, and the weighty feeling. None of these wines necessarily felt like that. So I'm gonna say let's rule that out. So ixnay on the ENA they. That's the most Pig Latin I can remember. Riesling. Now remember, if you automatically have ruled out Riesling, please think twice, because if you think you're ruling out Riesling because all these wines are drier, remember that Riesling is always dry, except when it is not. So most of the Riesling in the world are dry. They and export it to the US. So most of what we are familiar with in terms of like big box stores and restaurant wine lists, it's going to be sweeter Riesling, but that is not how most Riesling is in the world. And it's probably what I would choose to feature. So just know that. Riesling, peach and apricot, we got some of that. Lime, we got some citrus. Apple, jasmine, white flowers, we got some floral. Grapefruit, beeswax, petrol, mineral driven. Can be made lighter or very aromatic. Full range of dry to sweet possible. Color is pale straw. Structure is light-bodied, bone dry, to dessert sweet, all along the spectrum. High acid, mineral driven, and low alcohol content. I say it's about as strong of a candidate as Gewürztraminer, because there's some things that like are ringing some bells, but not all across the board. So let's just pencil that in and come back. Alberino is the next grape. Lemon pith and lemon zest, lemon seeds, so a whole lot of lemon. White rocks, yellow melon. Let's just rule that out because that's does not say any at all of any of your tasting notes that I was getting. Especially not the banana, guava, mango, floral, tropical style that goes on there. So Ixnay on the Alberino. Sauvignon Blanc. Now again, remember, there are so many styles of Sauvignon Blanc, so don't rule something out necessarily because it's not as familiar to you as one of these grapes might be. So grapefruit, lemon, herbal, melon, peach, herbs, and green notes. Well, we got a whole lot of the herbs and greens notes. We got peach, and I like how I have herbal twice. I'm sorry, I'll fix that typo. Lemon and grapefruit. So we have two different styles here distinctly. New World, everything colonized the Americas, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Old World is everything European. So New World, we're going to get a lot more grapefruit focus, a lot more pungent, a lot more aromatic. Old World, grapefruit still driving the bus, but more pithy, bitter notes. There wasn't any of your tasting notes that talked about grapefruit. So I'd say it's a strong candidate for the no category because grapefruit drives the best on Sauvignon Blanc, regardless of where it's from. So let's go ahead and X out the Sauvignon Blanc. Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris. Styles range drastically, like so many grapes do, based on the region. Pinot Grigio from Italy. Tart green apple, light-bodied, less aromatic, higher acid, mineral-driven, low alcohol, pale straw, and not aged in oak. Doesn't really give us a whole lot to go on. Pinot Gris, fuller-bodied, richer, honey, beeswax, floral honeysuckle, can be very aromatic, and a range from acidity, low to high. And then Ramato, or skin contact. Remember, we do have a skin contact wine in here. I'm not necessarily saying that this is Pinot Gris just because it's a skin contact wine. You can make skin contact wines from any of these grapes. Pinkish hue, yes. Sometimes close to rosé, bitter tannic notes on the palate, fuller body. All right, so that's a candidate for sure. It fits a lot of what we were talking about. Chenin Blanc, we just did a class on Chenin Blanc, so if you attended that, you should know whether or not this is a possibility for Chenin Blanc. Apple and pear, quince, honey, floral, lanolin, Chenin Blanc. We did get some funk in these wines. And linen, like that fresh linen quality. Color, pale straw to yellow. Okay. Light to medium bodied. Dry to off dry. Medium plus to high acid, low to medium alcohol. I'd say that that's a possibility too. So far we've got 4 possibilities. And finally, Chardonnay. Styles range again. Yellow and green apple, pears, lemon, high acid, lower alcohol for Old World. And New World, y'all all know that oaky, buttery California style. It's not Chardonnay. So even if you think that might be a possibility to help us speed along the process and get to the fun part of picking out region, we're gonna X the Chardonnay. There's no oak on any of these wines. We weren't going for those characteristics as much. So our options are limited to Chenin Blanc, Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, same grape, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer. Those were the 4 that we've kind of given a possibility to. Is there anything you want to absolutely rule out? Anything that you're 86 that it's definitely not blank? Mom, what do you want to rule out? It's all about process of elimination.
Gewürztraminer.
Mom wants to rule out Gewürztraminer. Great, let's do it. Ixnay on the Gewürztraminer. It is not a Gewürztraminer. So now we're left with Riesling, Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, or Chenin Blanc. Papa, you love Chenin Blanc. What do you say? Does this make you think of the 4 wines you tried?
No.
Papa says no. So let's figure out, is it Riesling or is it Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio? Whenever you're ready, type it into the chat room. We've got a 50-50 shot, and then we'll get into figure out what region this one grape, whether it is Riesling or Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, comes from. Gotta vote for Pinot Grigio. Vote for Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. Hits the right spot. Yes, it does, because I like these wines. A range of styles and the tasting notes. All right, Pinot Gris. Anyone else? Leave it to me to throw out something wild just to be wonky. Got Pinot Grigio again, Pinot Gris, and not because it's pink on number 4. Okay, great. Yes, I was hoping people weren't going to guess it just because there is an option for a skin contact on there. So, and Ryan says he's up in Maryland not tasting these wines, tunes in for the classes. He says even though he's not tasting them, leaning towards Riesling, especially because of the amber wine. All right, interesting. Let's now open up that envelope and your wine will be revealed, or the grape will be revealed, and then we'll figure it out. So open up that envelope that I said don't open till prompted. You are now officially prompted. Passing out the sheets to my parents. I should give them envelopes still. All right. It is indeed Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. Sorry, I missed a comment there. Rick says, rule out Gewürztraminer, Riesling, and Chenin Blanc. Can't find Alsace or Italy, so maybe Pinot Gris from somewhere else. All right, sweet. All right, so we are indeed drinking Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris. We have got in our glasses 4 different styles. If you notice, on here, we'll read this in a little bit, but mostly I want to focus on the bottom part. If you want a little bit more information about Pinot Grigio, the grape, or Pinot Gris, the grape, you can read that at the very big up top. But you've got Old World and New World. Old World regions, Alsace, France. You also have Old World in regions in northern Italy. Literally was introduced to Italy in the 1800s. It's native actually to Burgundy, France. It is in fact a genetic mutation of the Pinot Noir grape that just never went under veraison. So it just stopped changing color all the way. There's very little genetic differences between the two. And so throughout about, like, I guess the 1700s is when they realized that this genetic mutation was real enough to be called its own grape and started being cultivated worldwide, especially in Hungary. That's why up until the 80s, it was called Tokai Pinot Gris because it went from France to Hungary and back to France again, but hung out in Alsace. And until they lodged a complaint, like, you can't call your wine Tokai because it's not from Tokai, Hungary. They started calling it Pinot Gris. When it was introduced to Italy, it became known as Pinot Grigio and was made in a very different style. So Old World, even across the Old World, has 2 distinct styles. Pinot Gris from Alsace, that's more of these apple, pear, floral notes, still mineral driven, but lower levels of alcohol. Pale in color, acidity can range. Sometimes, if oak is ever used in wines from Alsace, it's neutral oak. So they literally bring these barrels and make them down in these basements of these like winding spiral staircases for these chateaus in Alsace. And those barrels stay there for like 20 years and are continued to be used. So you're not going to have new oak use in Alsace. They can be from lighter to really full-bodied, floral, honeyed, beeswaxy, almost viscous wines, and lower levels of acidity in that style. But you don't always have that style from Alsace. You can have the more mineral-driven, leaner styles. In northern Italy, though, Pinot Grigio made in a very different style. The grape they pick younger, so it has a lot more green notes. It's lighter bodied, lighter in alcohol content, but higher levels of acidity. So that's one style in Italy. And then you have Ramato, or the skin contact style in Italy. So those are your 2 primary regions in Italy. In the New World, the primary region is Oregon. You can have skin contact style or that Ramato style in Oregon, or Pinot Gris style, but you're not generally going to find Pinot Grigio style in Oregon. So throughout the world, where they grow this grape, they'll either call it Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio based on the style in which it's made. If they make it the traditional Alsatian way, they're going to call it Pinot Gris. So whether it's from New Zealand, Argentina, California, Oregon, South Africa, they'll call it Pinot Gris. A little bit of that rounder style of Pinot Gris, they'll call it that way. If they make it that lean, high acid, Granny Smith apple, really citrus notes, they're going to call it Pinot Grigio. They're never going to call it Ramato unless it's from Northern Italy, because it's the Italian word for copper, meaning the color that the wine gets when you have skin contact. But you can have skin contact wines. So here's the thing, and this is why it actually has color, because if you let the grape ripen all the way and let a long hang time on it, the grape itself can become almost as dark as a Pinot Noir grape. So it becomes almost a red wine grape. So some of these rosés, not rosé, it's orange wine basically. Rosé is made from red grapes. This is a white grape. Sometimes Pinot Gris can be made so dark that it almost, so different styles here. This class is a little bit different than the other classes because we're going to focus less on region, because each region has multiple different styles. We're going to focus more on style because we only have 3 regions and we have 4 wines. One region has 2 different styles represented. So I promise you that there is an Alsatian Pinot Gris in the mix. And whether it is the leaner, more mineral-driven style, or maybe it's really opulent. And I promise you there is a Northern Italian Pinot Grigio in the mix. I also promise you there is an Oregon Pinot Gris in the mix. So Pinot Gris from Oregon, made in the more Alsatian style. Less of that Granny Smith apple, more of that round opulence. And there is one skin contact wine. We all know what that is. That's wine number 4. We're just trying to figure out, is that wine number 4 from Italy? It's Ramato, or is it from Oregon, where Ramato style Pinot Gris are also made? So generally speaking, if you're going to be from Oregon, even though it's a cool climate region, you're still going to be warmer climate than these Northern Italian regions that make the skin contact. So you're going to have lower levels of acidity, higher levels of alcohol. So you tell me, let's go ahead and rule out for wine number 4. Let's pick out the easiest one first. Wine number 4 is obviously a Ramato style. Whether it comes from Italy or Oregon is up to you. So tell me in the comment box what you think wine number 4 is. Is it an Italian Ramato style Pinot Gris? Or is it from Oregon, a skin contact or Ramato style Pinot Gris? So, yes, I will let you know in about 30 seconds, Ryan. So Steve Hill, Sun Pop says Italian. What do you say, Mom? You often disagree. Mom says Oregon. Per usual, we'll have some disagreements over here. Tony says Oregon because the higher alcohol content. Joanna says Italian. Lisa says Oregon. We are going up and down, up and down. All right. Any last guesses here before I reveal? Oh, that's true. That might be the first time Tawana did not agree with you, Selma. You want to change your answer, Selma?
No.
All right. She still loves you. Yes. We are drinking Oregon Pinot Gris. And yes, I think Tony hit the nail on the head. The higher levels of alcohol content were more indicative of a New World wine. But here's the thing. If you guessed it wrong, like if you guessed Alsatian Ramato Pinot Gris instead of Oregon Pinot Gris on a blind tasting test, you would still get like 99.9% credit. So please don't think that you have somehow failed in any way if you were guessing an Italian wine. So this is Amaro. They're a tiny little producer in Oregon, and it's only 12.8% alcohol. I have a feeling it's slightly higher because everyone fudges their numbers a little bit lower. And yes, it is a natural wine, so they're going to use all natural yeast. And so we got a little bit of funk whenever people are using full natural yeast and they do natural wine fermentations. Sometimes I get a little bit more of that natural hippie aromatic in the wine. I love how they actually put the ingredients in there too. So the ingredients are, you'd be surprised how many more ingredients are in most wines. Hand harvested Pinot Gris grapes, awesome. Indigenous yeast, so they're using native yeast. They're not inoculating with cultured yeast. naturally occurring malolactic bacteria. So we did get that creamy texture. So it underwent some malolactic fermentation, and sulfites. Now, if you think it's not a good wine because it has sulfites, please keep in mind, oftentimes these huge tanks of grapes that are being processed and fermented, they might take sulfur dioxide in a spray bottle where there is sulfur dioxide put in 1 scoop to a liter of water, and it's literally just sprayed on top of the grapes. So technically there are sulfites in here, but we're not talking about like massive amounts of sulfites that are going to give you a headache. Don't be scared of sulfites the way that the natural movement tells you to be. All right, so 1 down, 3 to go. So we have our skin contact wine down. So now we're left with one of these wines is a true Oregon Pinot Gris. One of these wines is an Alsatian Pinot Gris. One of these wines is an Italian Pinot Grigio. Main difference is focus. Italian Pinot Grigio will be lighter body, higher levels of acid, lower levels of alcohol. That's your Italian Pinot Grigio. So look at your notes now. Your notes have the answers if you were tracking your notes all along. An Alsatian Pinot Gris, it can be really rich and nutty and floral and opulent, or it can be leaner style and more mineral driven. We have 2 different styles there, so I apologize. That's just the way wine world blind tasting works. If it were easier, you wouldn't need to take a class to learn how to do it. So one of these is an Alsatian Pinot Gris. No 3 of these wines were really rich, opulent, full-bodied, round, viscous, and weighty. So that's not the style that was exhibited, so we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus more on that leaner, more mineral-driven. You're going to have apple and pear and floral notes, lower levels of alcohol, pale to yellow in color. All right, that's an option. One of these wines fits that. And finally, our classic Oregon Pinot Gris, generally more fruit and floral-driven than the mineral-driven Alsatian styles. Softer levels of acidity and slightly higher levels of alcohol because, again, Oregon is a warmer climate than Alsace. Even though Alsace, you have a lot of sun, sunlight hours per day per year are some of the highest in all of France because of the rain shadow of the Vosges Mountains. But you still have a cooler climate across the board than you have in Oregon, which you think it's rainy all the time. It actually doesn't kind of rain from like August through October. So you have a really dry, warm growing season in Oregon. So you're going to have higher levels of alcohol content, lower levels of acidity. So now it's up to you. Whenever you're ready, you can tell me what you think it is. Just list 1, Oregon, Italy, Alsace. 2, Oregon, Italy, Alsace. 3, Oregon, Italy, Alsace. I'll give you some time. You can retaste if you want, figure out like, oh man, my notes were leading me this way, but maybe I need to retaste and figure it out. And if you're not ready to see other people's answers, don't look at the chat room while people start typing in their answers. Give yourself time to think about them. It's crazy how much these wines change too as they have continued to open up. I never put my bottles back in the fridge, so we are like very close to room temperature now. Tawana says, I'm so unsure on this one. Yes, if I had done Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, it would be a very obvious choice for everyone, which styles fit which regions. I figured y'all were too advanced for that now by this point. We've been doing these virtual classes since March when COVID happened, and we've been doing blind tasting classes at least once, if not 2 or 3 times a month since then. So I figured I'd give you a bigger challenge. So if you are challenged by this, that was my point. I apologize, but also you're welcome, because the only way you can get to be a better taster is by challenging yourself on the things that are much harder to distinguish. So I won't start reading off the comment boards until I give y'all all a little bit more time to finalize your answers.
We gotta get some Jeopardy music.
Yeah. Next time I will get my phone and I'll play the Jeopardy theme song during this time. All right. Interesting. Okay. I'll just wait on you, Chris. I don't want to start. I know y'all have the bigger group, so you might need a little bit more time. But before I reveal these, I want to make sure I don't start reading off any guesses or answers until you're ready. So Chris Nelson, that crew, if you just give me a thumbs up or type in your answers, whichever one. You don't have to type in your answers if you just are ready for me to give the answers. But that as soon as you give me the thumbs up, we'll go. Now, oh man, I can't deal with too much conflict in my life. There's enough going across the table for me between my mom and my dad, their different answers. I can't have Son Mom and Tawana start disagreeing. Y'all need to have some coffee and figure this out. Wait, hold on, Chris. We haven't revealed the answers yet, so don't worry. We haven't revealed the regions yet, so we have not revealed the regions yet. But that clues me in that I'm about the regions. So across the board, it looks like, let's see, see here, wine number 1, Alsace, we got for Tawana, 2 Oregon, 3 Italy. 3 Italy, Lisa agrees. Lisa's torn between 1 and 2, so similar. Some Mom says Oregon 1, Italy 2, Alsace 3. So everybody's all over the place. Tony says Oregon 1, Alsace 2, Italy 3. So again, we are agreeing on Oregon 1 with my mom, but disagreeing on the next 2. Chris Nelson says 1, France. On the comments when I see them. Let's go ahead and say to the world that Son Mom is never wrong. Number 1 is indeed from Oregon. It is an Oregon Pinot Gris. Aola Hills is the producer. It is from Aola, Amity, and Willamette Valley Pinot. It is that classic easy drinking style Oregon Pinot Gris. So slightly more floral, a little bit more round, higher levels of alcohol content, and lower levels of acidity. So those delicate white flower notes would clue me in that it's probably that easy drinking style of Oregon Pinot Gris. Now, number 2 and number 3, if you want to adjust your answers here. One of these is Italian, one of these is Alsatian. Tawana, I will never go against Son Mom again.
Maybe now.
Number 2 is from Italia. It is the Kaluta from the northeast region of Friuli Colli Orientali. And it is that bright acid, Granny Smith apple. Definitely not as uninteresting as a lot of the bulk Pinot Grigios are. And because it was a little bit more interesting, a little bit more mineral driven, I can see why it could be confused with a leaner, more mineral driven style of Alsace France. So that leads us to wine number 3, which is indeed Trimbach. It is a 2014 Pinot Gris, their reserve style. Their single vineyard Grand Cru styles definitely are more along the opulent styles. Trimbach is considered to be like one of the 5 great producers in Alsace, France. It's like notable for producing the best wines from the region. So Trimbach Reserve Pinot Gris 2014 vintage. We do have a little bit of age on that as well. Was not noticeable. So that wine could easily age for quite a bit longer. Kaluta, this was the first time I've had their Pinot Gris. If you've been following me for a little while, we featured their Timorasso grape in my reserve wine collection back in May. No, we didn't. I'm sorry. There was a different producer I am so sorry. That was Columbera. Everything that starts with a C in Italian and 4 drinks in, Kira gets them confused. Never mind. Disregard that comment. And, of course, the Oregon Pinot Gris Eola Hills. So I will email you all the pricing information about these wines. Let's see. Oh, Charlie's been to the winery for #1. That's awesome. In Oregon. Thought it was French. And you know what? That's the fun of these wines. And blind tasting is getting more and more difficult these days because newer world producers are making wines in that elegant reserve style of the old world. And old world producers are now starting to make wines in the more opulent, flamboyant style of the new world. So blind tasting is becoming more and more difficult as producers change the way that they're making their wines. So it will only continue to get harder, but I have faith in you because you all did tremendous tonight. Your tasting notes were fabulous. And this was by far the hardest blind tasting that I have thrown your way since we started doing these classes. So I appreciate your stick-to-itiveness and your tenacity in pursuing this skill. Hopefully you had fun along the way. Please do not be dismayed if you didn't get the right grape or you mixed up the regions or whatever it was. The idea is still just to taste wine and analyze it without preconceived notions, to better understand it and to hopefully then better enjoy it and better understand what your taste palette is. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm taking 2 weeks off of these virtual classes and we'll resume again in September. Remember, my website is up now and running with all of my current wine features if you should need wine in the next couple of weeks. I will be throwing out a promotional celebration sale for the website relaunch, and that will go out tomorrow morning. So check your email tomorrow morning for a really killer sale that will go through the first 2 weeks of September. Well, I take a couple Wednesdays off. Maybe I'll still hang out with my parents. We shall see. I'll let you know. Thanks so much. And if you have any questions, you all know my email address. You can message me on Facebook, Instagram, text, call, cell phone, whatever you like, I'm here. So, and yes, you can order from the website now. So you can just build your own 6-pack and email and send it to me through the website. It'll go to me email and I'll email you a confirmation and payment information just like I did before. So thanks again. Love you all and stay safe, stay sane, and stay healthy during these times. Cheers.